All right, yay, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the I Love New Yorkers panel. My name is Lauren. I'm the founder of NYC WebFest. I am going to leave you here with our moderator, Joanna Pickering, who's a former NYC WebFest jury member, award nominee, and moderated a great panel with Victor Williams on Friday. So please look out for that on YouTube. And I will leave you guys to it. Thank you so much, Joanna, and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm on Pacific time, so I'm still on my Sunday morning, but it's always a delight to be here with New York WebFest. This is actually our New Yorker panel, and I was in New York for the pandemic at the height of the curve, so I'm very aware of what we've all gone through as creators. And many of the series creators on our panel today have actually transferred to this medium to create in the lockdown, which is, staggering how artists can make that transition and keep creating. So, a round of applause to them for that. On the panel, we have Ray Harrington and Lee Leshen, and they are the creators of a great series, which I loved watching, Undependent. And I believe stand-up comedians originally before COVID hit. Ray, I heard you were on Conan. Yeah, okay. And so your timing in your series is exceptional. I really enjoyed it, so thank you. And then we have...
Thank you very much.
And then we have Steve Becker, Brazzy Jazzy, another great series with sort of the South American vibe coming to New York and, a girl trying to find her feet in New York City for the first time. Obviously, been there, not from South America, but made that journey. So that was wonderful to watch. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. I wanted to complain about Lee changing his appearance so dramatically from his show. He looked far more demented in the show.
Yeah, it's lockdown, isn't it? We've all turned into Vikings.
Yeah.
And then we have Dani and Tim, which were in the series Running Lines, which as an actress I adored, because it's all about an actor preparing for this audition and going through the routine and challenges of acting. So I look forward to talking about that with Tim, Werenko, and Dani Marcus. Sorry, I didn't get your full names. And then we have, last but not least, Jon Roufaeal, which you created Chosen, which is just mind-blowing. It's I watched your series last, and I wasn't expecting it, and it's a fantasy musical, and the music you wrote yourself. So that was absolutely incredible. So everyone, great job. Before we go any further, obviously lots to talk about how you made these in the pandemic and so forth. But I just said a little bit about your series, so maybe you want to just take turns and maybe tell us a little bit about the series, sort of the arc and the main concepts of your show. Let's start with Undependent. I have this order I watched them in, guys, so I'll probably stick to it, but feel free to jump in.
Ray, go ahead on that one. Yeah, I would say.
Oh, okay. So Undependent is a loosely a mockumentary. It kind of lives in the fourth wall break. Essentially, it is two guys that had a medium success with a documentary and now are just desperate to find the next like water cooler documentary, like Tiger King or Making a Murderer. And it's these two desperate people trying to make something, and ultimately every episode they their own character flaws ruin any possibility of making anything real. Yeah, it's a it's a weird show.
I'm so glad you said that, because what is, for me as a writer, what is outstanding about your show is you obviously have set up all the stakes and conflict externally, but the characters' inner conflict and like they're just set up to always fail, and yet you love them. Right. My favorite scene is the one actually after the one the festival screened, and where he's pushing the laptop. They've had a disagreement. He's gone to find this troll guy that's posted this horrible thing on Twitter. So they've gone to like really fight with them. And your character is just so polite. He can't do it. And he pushes the timing when he pushes the laptop into the trash. But it's done in the most, supreme politeness of like, I'm going to do it. I get the table. It's a wonderful, wonderful scene. And that sums up what you said about the conflict and so forth. So you both wrote.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome. I really loved it. I'm sure everyone felt the same.
Yeah,
So
and I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question.
you wrote the show?
Yes, yeah, I kind of fleshed it out with my co-lead Derek Furtado, and the two of us are predominantly stand-up comedians, and we've just worked so much, and we made the real documentary Be a Man Together, and you know that kind of birthed this show. So we developed a lot of it together, and then I would sit down and write out the scripts and leave some room for improvisation. But yeah, it was
that came across in the show, that feeling of scripted, but still the actors were improving, and it gave it that, but so tightly. It was really wonderful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is so far I love this panel because it's mainly just compliments. So
say that at the end. And Lee, I'm going to chat to you. Obviously, you are the producer on the show.
Yes.
And I'm going to come into the questions later more about the production and how we get set up. So I will definitely come back to you on that. But great show.
Thank you.
So I'd like to talk to Steve about Brazzy Jazzy. 3 women you've written, 3 strong women.
Well, I'm married to a Brazilian woman, so I had to live up to a very high standard.
Yeah.
I had to just win my own household first before I could start taking over or taking on web festivals.
What does
it's a show about a Brazilian girl, I don't know, who comes to New York to become a fashion designer, and her adventures, I say, are sometimes sexy, often funny, but always caffeinated. And that's why the editing speed, I don't know if anyone who has seen it, it is at what I call a caffeine speed comedy.
I'm loving the stage where they're sort of doing the Charlie's Angels, and they're all dressed up, and it's just a disaster. And but yeah, you've got the speed and the humor. I mean, when you first arrive in New York, it is kind of that madness of like, what's happening next.
Well, being married to a Brazilian, being part of the Brazilian community, I've lived in Brazil for 7 years. We have heard horror stories of all of these Brazilian women and men, but mostly women, answering stupid ads on Craigslist to, foot model. And it always, shockingly breaks down into something very demented, harmless yet demented, and, perverted, whatever words you want to throw in there. So I wanted to show, there's plenty of shows out there that are dramatic and show the immigrant experience of coming to New York. I can only look at things in humorous terms and show that it is crazy, but, they band together, and it's not like a revenge fantasy, but they're just sort of a surrogate family trying to survive in New York without any of the requisite skills to really survive here.
And that's why I actually admire your show, because, you've got a strong feminist panel moderator, and that that your show is, you're very brave to do that show because you're writing from the point of view of females, and you are addressing that sort of shady area, exactly as you said. When women or men or anyone or an artist turns up in New York, they don't have any skills to do anything, but will apply on Craigslist to anything, and of course that slope into insanity. So it was really well done. I enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. And like Ray said, this is really a great panel so far. It's,
nice.
It's not like talking to distributors and anything else. I had mentioned this to Lauren when I originally made this for Brazilian TV, and then if the deal fell apart after we'd shot a lot of it. And I pitched it in LA, and they were all like, yeah, but can't you make her Mexican? I go, well, I could, but the show's already shot, A. And B, they say there's no shows about Brazilians in the United States. I said, well, that's an opportunity. There are no shows about Brazilians in the United States. There might be room for one, even on like True TV or something.
Things like that, but that's great. It's always the case. I've been in the same position as a writer where they're trying to make you change your lead into a white lead. It's definitely happened before I was with 3 Arts. And it's really important to stand the ground. And what your show gave me was exactly that South American energy from Brazil that makes the show. It's the essence of the show. So we'll definitely talk more about the distribution journey a little bit on. Okay, Dani and Tim, hello. So I just want to say that we have Dani with us today, who is also the lead actress in the show, which is where we got a little bit confused until we realized, of course, Dani's the co-creator. So we have added her to, we're going to update our posters. So in the future, it will be on Google with both of you. And we have Dani on our show. So we're not all guys, which I'm really chuffed about. But a little lesson there that when we're applying and submitting work as directors to make sure that we are covering all creators. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Great show. I mean, literally, it was, you know, I'm an actress. That's how I came to New York. So your show meeting with Steve's was just like, oh my God, this is great. So tell us a little bit about it.
So I'll go first, and I'll let her close. So the elevator pitch is that it's high maintenance meets Mrs. Maisel. So the main character is Nikki Wolf, and she is a New York actress who is struggling through the audition scene in New York to get parts, you know, in New York theater and then beyond. And when she needs to practice or rehearse or run lines, she calls upon various friends, and she drops in and out of their lives as, you know, just as a rehearsal partner or a drinking buddy, to commiserate, what have you. And that's the basic idea of the thrust of the show.
And it's all about this audition, isn't it? Working out for this audition that she goes for. And I'm not going to obviously spoil what happens, but she's preparing for an audition.
Our festival episode is the midway point of our series. So you get the build up to the audition and then the aftershock of it afterwards. So it's a roller coaster. She's an actor who's been at it long enough to know it's time to start doing better work. And so
better work in her craft, or like a career change?
Better work in her craft first and foremost, but, you know, to stop accepting just any job and to strive for something better. And so she tries to challenge herself artistically as hard as it is in the reality of the world. But in the course of the series, she has to challenge herself personally as well.
I love the scenes that were just very sort of the sequences of being an actress, just very small things, waking up, you know, having that lemon tea for the throat and, you know, trying to do everything so cleanly that, you know, actors try and be and often fail. And I really thought that was beautiful. So you both created the show. How did that come about? Is one of you an actor? Is it set? It seems to be set in a lot of truth.
So Dani is an actress. I'm a writer, director, producer. I have a studio in Manhattan called 3Beat. Quick plug for my company. So I've been working in the world of animation for a very, very long time. I was the producer on Pokemon for 10 years, and then I left that company to start 3Beat, and now we have a new company that where we do writing and stuff. But a lot of it is focused in animation. But my background was in live action film and theater, and I just have been working on other people's projects for so long. We really wanted to do something new. And Dani asked at one point, you know, can we do something? Or I want to get more on camera stuff. And then characteristically, I took this little project and made it infinitely more complicated than it needed to be. And I started writing these scripts, but I realized I really didn't have the voice for it. So Dani jumped in and fixed all my mistakes. And made everything better, and then we went out and shot it. And while it is not autobiographical, it was inspired because I had an audition that I needed to run lines for, and he's often the person I turn to, and we were in the midst of doing that and said, oh, you know, this scenario, not necessarily the two characters in the scene, but the two people who are working together, be interesting to be a fly on the wall and watch the interaction between those two people, depending on what their relationship is. So that was sort of the birth of the idea for it.
Yeah.
At the end of running lines for an audition, what we found is that we learned more about each other than you would learn about like Stella and Stanley. So it was an interesting. That's what the birth of the concept was.
And I love that about writing. That, you know, good writing, you also discover things about yourself, and it's a process that you go through. So that's amazing. So it sounds very like Ray's show. It's a lot of sort of improv writing in there and just working with it. Awesome, guys. And then we have Jon. Hello. Tell me about Chosen. I just loved it. The music. Wow.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was my good friend Travis Nyland who wrote all those songs and actually voiced that Bard character in the episode
But
that
Jon,
I think screens
you wrote the music, didn't you?
in this festival. No, my friend Travis wrote the music. I wrote the scripts. There are 3 episodes, so like the whole story I wrote, and but I'm wise enough to know that there are better people than me who can do much better work with music and things like that. So I pulled him in.
Right.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was. I mean, mainly it was just like the show came from sort of my time living in. I live in LA now too. So, but my time living in New York, and for the decade plus that I lived there, my 2 best friends and I we would write musicals constantly and put musicals up, and we did a lot of improv at the at first at the UCB and then at the Magnet Theater in New York, and we would just consistently bring in a new show every 6 months to a year or so and run it there for a while. And then we would take it to the Fringe. We've had a couple play at Nymph before. I guess Nymph and Fringe are gone now, but a ton of, and we just grew up in musical theater and we loved it. And I am, and I mean, my friends are too, but I'm especially a big lover of fantasy and fantasy storytelling. And I've wanted to do it. And you're kind of like, you get to a point where it's like, well, how you think it takes a budget or it takes like, it's kind of insurmountable because it's fantasy, but it's kind of like, well, how do you pare it down? How do you make it simple? And, when you couple that with a theatrical sensibility, especially musical theater, which is like just heavy on the lighting and the atmosphere and stuff, like, if you can just do it very small and contained, I thought that there was an opportunity there.
Yeah, you're so right. Tell us a little bit about this particular series and the story in it.
Yeah. So again, coming from fantasy storytelling, or my love of it, there's a plethora of sort of chosen one stories in fantasy, and they're fairly predictable. And so like one of the things that I wanted to challenge was how do you maybe look at doing a chosen one story that's a little different, and which is why there's the question mark at the end of the title. So I set out to do that, and of course you need a monster and for the hero to fight, and so we established that thing at the very top. And it's, every episode has to have a song, and you want it to stay a certain length, otherwise it gets very unwieldy. And it tends, because it's like puppets, and it's also trying to set fantastical settings and what have you. It takes a lot of post work. But yeah, that was basically the idea for the series. It's about a chosen one story that's sort of like, maybe he isn't a chosen one, so what does that mean? And then if he is brought into this one, what's that? I'm sorry.
The eyes of the puppet and the location, the drop that he's surrounded. It's just it's very magical and very beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I because we're such a big panel, I'm not going to read any bios out because I just think it would take time from speaking about your own series. But basically, my next question is, tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to this point. Were you always knew you were going to be writing, creating? Just Ray, do you want to go first? I know you were on Conan that Lauren's dying to hear about.
Oh yeah. I was on Conan just before COVID happened. I was flying back when kind of the first cases were being reported in the country, and so had a long year ahead of me of kind of planning out more tour stuff and things like that, and then everything stopped. So now I feel like I'm in like a forced retirement where like comedy was like, no, you're fine, just you have a 6-year-old, go do that for a while. And but yeah, so as far as the journey of Undependent, like I said, myself and Derek Furtado, we worked on Be a Man, which was a real documentary that was focused on myself. It's like a journey film of I didn't have a dad growing up. My wife told me she was pregnant, and before I had my son, I wanted to pursue all of the ridiculous, tropey, stereotypical masculine things that I didn't have growing up, drinking, fighting, stuff like that. So in that process, being a very shoestring budget, like no budget kind of production, and making a feature-length film, we really learned the grassroots elements of things. And going through the process of distribution and talking to different people, that inspired pretty much everything with Undependent, because we were talking about, well, what's next? What do we do next? What's our next project? And people were asking us. And we realized very quickly, like, oh, it's this. It's this desperation of like, what do we do? What do we do?
So real.
Yeah, and being a stand-up comedian first and foremost, I love film and I love documentary as a genre, and wanting to play with that idea. The most exciting thing for me in the process of creating Undependent was creating that fourth wall that it lives in, where what we're watching as an audience is the camera footage from the crew that they have. So it's behind the scenes. It's not even behind the scenes. It's just everything unfolding. And they have no idea that this is now a thing. And so it really comes from that element of wanting to explore the creative process. I think Ray and Derek, the characters, represent the two voices in any creative person's head. One is a perfectionist and nothing's good enough. And the other person is just, they're thrilled. They're like, well, if we make it, it's going to be great. And those two things colliding, those two pressure systems create a lot of thunder. So that's really where it comes from.
And where were you born? You're a New Yorker, or?
No, I feel like a fraud on the panel. I'm in Rhode Island right now.
Okay.
And I gotta go. But yeah, I'm originally from Maine, and now I live in Rhode Island. And I travel for stand-up, all over the country, different countries. So I'm in New York quite a bit. It seems like there's always, a project that I'm working on or something like that, or I'll be in LA. And so I love shooting in New York because I get to have that kind of outside perspective of it, where I'm a tourist. So I'm just like, oh, a city bike sounds fun. Let's do that.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And Lee, how did you meet, and how did you start, and what's some of the projects you've worked on in your past?
Yeah, so I started with I started when I was 16. I lied about my age and I got a job at a casting director, and then from there it was I've looked like this since my bar mitzvah, so it was easy, but I graduated college. I worked for an agency, and then I eventually moved.
Sorry, this is all on the East Coast.
College was in Miami, and then I grew up in New York, and split my time between Long Island and the city. Parents were divorced, so I was kind of a double life kid.
Yeah.
But I went to school in the University of Miami in Florida, and then came back and went to work at an agency. And then after that, I ended up later on at two different studios, and then left to form my own kind of branded entertainment agency type of thing, and didn't really like it, and happened to fall into documentaries because it was a rainy July Saturday, and I just got an Apple TV, and I realized I could watch my internet on my television at this point now. I was like, somebody's probably on YouTube have done like a Back to the Future documentary, because I seen Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3 were on. So I was like, well, somebody's probably done that. I want to see some behind the scenes stuff, and I don't want to go out and buy a DVD that has it. I want to see what fans have done, and there was nothing really out there. But I found a Kickstarter that somebody was doing something like this. Somebody had the same idea, so I got in touch with them, and they didn't really have a ton of experience in actual movie industry, but they were still very talented nonetheless. And I said, okay, well, if I can help guide them a little bit through the industry waters, but then let creatively, the director take those reins, and our executive producer had a great staff that gave us his whole crew. So everything kind of came together. We were able to get these, and we were able to get Michael J. Fox. And of course, once you're able to get those people, then everything falls into place. So
yeah, wow, so you've got a lot of producing experience.
Well, we couldn't get Michael J. Fox for Undependent, which really, it's still a really negative thing, and I'm very bitter about it, that we couldn't get Michael J. Fox.
We said we were going to talk about that, Ray. We said we were going to talk about that, Ray, on the camera.
Like, call him up. Hey, Michael. Okay, that's great. So a lot of production experience that came in that you could bring, though, from working in bigger things and then moving into a more DIY project.
Yeah, and we screened the movie was called Back in Time, the Back to the Future one, and we screened it at someplace called the Somewhere North of Boston Film Festival, which is where I met Ray, because Ray was screening Be a Man there. So I remember after the screening, I just said, how can I tell my friends to see this? This is a great movie. And I instantly fell in love with the man, the character, the whole thing. Derek was there. I got to spend time with Derek as well and really get to know him. And it was
that's that last
I fell in love with the man, the character, and Derek was there too.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just saying the idea of Ray and Derek is what I mean. I instantly got, because they did some stand up before the movie, and I instantly kind of got the back and forth, and I think these guys are great, and I want to see more of them.
The thing about festivals, that's exactly, coming to an independent film festival, screening your films at this, the amount of times you find another collaboration or the next project, which is why we're so grateful to festivals like this. Okay, Steve, tell me where you, obviously Brazil, tell me your journey and your wife's that's inspired the show.
All right, I got a few 1 degrees of separation to sell first. Obviously, Lee, I was bar mitzvahed too, but I didn't go and follow your path. But I've been working production for 25 years. Yeah, I'm that old. And Ray, I grew up in Rhode Island, so I'm almost as much a fraud as you are. But my parents were born and raised here in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I was reluctantly raised in Rhode Island. So I actually have 2 projects that are taking place in Rhode Island. I'll give you a call. Yes, I lived for 3 years in LA. I lived for 7 years in Brazil. So the fish out of water tail is a pretty much a staple of a lot of things I do. My wife, this project, Brazzy Jazzy, has been percolating for like 5-6 years. We did a proof of concept. It was looking good. Then we had to get the right actors. And then we did, as I said, I'd gone down there. I had a lot of contacts down there. And I thought I sold the show on a handshake agreement. And lo and behold, I shot 3 22-minute episodes. And then anyone who's read the New York Times or seen the newspaper ever knows that Brazil's economy has been in collapse. And generally the country's been in collapse for quite the last 5 years. So I was left with all this footage. I was good. My choice was either to shoot more and just, as I told earlier, go to LA and try and sell it, which wasn't working, or for the first time do a web series. And so I love web series now. 22 minutes is hard to keep. Obviously, the pacing I have for this show would not hold up over 22 minutes. People would have an aneurysm or a heart attack. But in 4 to 5 minute bites, you can change the narrative around. You can keep only the best parts.
How
boom,
long
boom.
How long does it take you to write for those small bites?
Well, I had already shot it. I write very quickly. Unlike Red.
Final product, but it's very organic and fast flowing.
I wrote a 70-page script for that. Was, I don't know, 2 weeks. But there were ideas. I'm not comparing myself to Woody Allen, but I'm like Woody Allen. I walk around, stutter a lot, and then I just sit down at the typewriter or computer and bang it out very quickly. So it's all really done here first. Now when writing screenplays, I outline a lot. But unlike Ray, I'm not a successful comedian. I would only go up. I could never remember an act, so I only did all my acts once. And what I did use it for is using, I would go up there and tell the story of Jasmina as in joke format. So I know this Brazilian girl, Jasmine, you won't believe what happened to her yesterday and stuff like that. So I see what works, what doesn't work. Yeah. And I still do that to this day, but you'll never find me because it's never under my own name. I was a big Stephen Wright fan, so I use a lot Stephen Wrong, Esteban Wrong. The word wrong is in there a lot. So I don't invite family and friends. I just go up in front of a very cold audience and try out some of this stuff. And I'm also a huge believer in table reads in front of live audiences. And book a little studio. So it's not everyone saying, this is so great. Oh my God. Yes, yes, yes. You want to hear someone else say, wow, that, people can't fake a laugh.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I learned to write through theatre and playwriting, and the advantage is you get your actors in workshops the work's up on its feet immediately. So I learned rewriting and hearing it just from being able to hear it live. Okay, Dani and Tim, obviously we've spoken a little bit, so maybe a little bit less time here. You obviously, Dani, were acting, and you've mentioned that you had a studio. You have a studio, Tim. But did you take any writing courses? You went to school to study this? You know, what was the sort of bio background?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went to NYU like a million years ago, back when wheels were square, and there was like no digital anything. It was like actual film stuff. So that's like my live action background.
As well. Did you? Yes.
Yeah, but always behind the scenes. I'm not as an actor, but like as a stage manager, writer, theater director. And strangely enough, that's actually how I met Dani. Is I was a co-writer on a show called The Water. We were me and the other two writers, we were artists in residence at Tribeca Performing Arts, and then we went out to Palo Alto, California. When was that?
Oh, too long ago to say the date.
I know, a long time ago. And you know, so yeah, that's where we met. She was in that show. At the time, I was married and things were fine, and we had a totally like reasonable, like professional relationship. And then time went by. Things changed, and then here we are. But that's where we met, was through the theater, because Dani's just a fantastic actress.
I first of all, I had 2 bat mitzvahs. Not going to go into it, but I just wanted
it's not
to.
A competition, guys. It's not a competition.
No, I know, but it's true. It's a true story. I'm originally from California, so I'm a fraud too, but I've been living in New York long enough. You know, when your poetry is rejected by the New Yorker 3 times, you're a New Yorker. But all I really ever wanted to do was act. And I've always written, but I just wanted people to give me a script and let me say the words, and that's all I ever wanted to do. But the last couple of years, I kept hearing these little voices saying, you know, create your own work. If you're not seeing the kind of stuff you want to do, make it. And I was like, no. And then, you know, when we started talking, suddenly, I don't know, like a light switch flipped, and I thought, this is exciting. And the more we got into this project, the more I thought I really, I want to do more of this. So I don't really know where it's going to go, but it's been great.
It's so important. And, you know, I want to talk next, you know, about our industry and as writers, our responsibility we have to issues like diversity and how we, you know, reflecting that in narrative and on the screen. But I think what you said is so vital, that to be writing, you know, I was an actress and I got sick of waiting to play for the roles that I wanted to play, the strong female driving roles. So I write them myself. So I think that's really important, and it's great that you know that you've partnered on this and are writing on this project. So that's exciting. Jon, how did you get into your fantasy musical world? You were
yeah, it was actually, it's funny. I like Dani. I'm an actor too. So like going to New York and auditioning a bunch and not getting anything. I mean, there's part of that. I guess I was lucky in the sense that like I was in New York with 2 best friends who, one of them was really a driving force for like, we just gotta do our own thing. So throughout all of that time in New York, we were constantly we were taking improv classes, we were doing improv, and we were writing musicals and doing that. And that was just constant for like 10, 12 years. So there, with that background, then we came to LA and our lives obviously changed. We all started sort of like getting married and having families and things like that. So that forces you to slow down a little bit. But we started, we tried to do a couple of shows, and then I tried to do a show that I wanted to film, and it was a complete failure. We got together that first night, we shot everything. I cut my piece together, and it was awful. And I was just feeling bad about it. And basically it just, that kind of like flipped the switch of like, well, this didn't work, but maybe there's something to this sort of format, which was like, you know, I had rented a space, and we went in, and it was just a bunch of creative people getting together and like just getting to just put up their work that we would film and cut together. And I was like, there's something to that, at least, kind of like, again, securing your own space, a place where you can go and be creative and make something. So let's keep that going. And I did.
What you're saying, I think it's important for, you know, our new filmmakers in the audience, that a lot of our creations come from our mistakes or things we can't do. It's actually, here's the problem, that's stopping us, and you can actually make that problem the way forward, you know?
Right.
Because solving it becomes the creativity in solving it, and obviously your project can take a new direction, which becomes the success. So I force myself not to be afraid of problems and obstacles, that are sort of lighting a sort of unique way.
Yeah. And let me be clear, it's a fail. It's not out. Like, I didn't put it out because it's terrible. I won't share it at all. But it at least encouraged me to like do something different and do something. And I think the other thing of it too is like, I was doing what I thought I could do. Like, let's keep it simple and easy and like do something else. And after that, and after how bad it turned out, I was just like, well, can I challenge myself a little bit and do something I actually want to do? And, you know, with my love of fantasy and musicals and all that stuff, that's ambitious. It's not an easy, like, oh, let's do a web series.
Comes across in your show, you know, it is. It's just like another dimension. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Pushed yourself out of your comfort zone. And so it's great. Okay, well, this is going very quickly, so I think it's important that we do discuss. And just at this stage, feel free to speak if you have something to say faster than someone else. But I want to talk about, you know, we've got Dani, so we've got the female lens and myself, but as males, you're obviously, I don't want to say you're under pressure, being that it's females that have got to do all this extra work, but you are now very accountable for making sure that females are included in the female lens. And I'm just interested on how you're adapting to that, your responsibility as male writers and the male lens in writing.
Well, I guess I'll throw myself in first. Well, my show,
because as we talked at the very beginning, your show is 3 strong women, but in an area where it's, you know, males are exploiting them by definition of the situations that are real. They are real. So that lens is very real.
I guess growing up in New York, despite my brief time in Rhode Island, I always had roommates, like everyone. Most of my roommates were female, so it was a good learning experience since I didn't grow up with any sisters. And you learn what their real fears are, what their pleasures are, hopefully. And my first feature film was about a rock and roll lesbian band that did very well. I'm still earning money off the music. The film is earning me nothing. It's been but 10 years. So that inspired me to write another show based on that, but that's time for another day. But I always found, you know, female characters could be so much more layered, that there isn't one stereotype. And
well said.
And band dynamics, because I was in music a lot, as I know John is, that most bands tear apart because they argue over all these things that before they've ever even made a song. So I just find that you can, if you just let the diversity of females come in, it really just opens up all kinds of characters and makes the men more dynamic. They may be more of an asshole, but they're more dynamic.
To say, obviously, this applies to the Black Lives Movement also, you know, the Me Too and the Black Lives Movement, you know, Black males, transgender, you know, it's diversity is what I'm basically addressing.
Well, I just finished shooting a pilot, and it's been released now. It's about bands trying to make it on the Lower East Side of New York. Nothing could be more New York than that. And the one, besides, you know, the grunting of distributors who aren't excited by it, but it is very diverse. And this was, I did 2 years ago, and it was before most of these things had come to the forefront. But how can you be a New Yorker and just cast white males in anything? Yeah. Where are you gonna, where in walk of life in New York is that?
Lee, a question for you. Obviously, we all know that when we're trying to make diverse decisions, and it happens so much easier on the independent level, you know, independent filmmakers will instantly cast diversely, and there's no issue because we have more freedom because it's not tied up in money. So what's your thoughts on standing the ground, you know, with bigger studios and where finance is tied, where, you know, that's where the gatekeepers are suddenly like, no, this isn't going to sell, and like diversity sells every time at the, you know, the box office. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that they should look at the election that just happened. I mean, they're going to look at and see that there's it's not just white people in America, that there is an audience. Ultimately, studio executives are, you know, driven by profits. And I think that the smart thing to do is to write for everybody and not just for
And
the
I
coasts.
guess the Black
You know
Lives
what I mean?
Matter movement was so huge because it was accountability in so many numbers that they now that they suddenly have the courage to do the right thing.
Sure. And it's funny. I was talking to Ray about this because there are so many people behind the camera that that where diversity needs to be interjected as well. But it also already may be happening and we don't know about it. Meaning, we deal with people all the time, whether they're a sound mixer for a movie or something, or an assistant to an agent we're dealing with. Or we have no idea what they look like. Yeah. Most of the time, we have no idea what they sound like because we're just communicating via email. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I look at that and say, well, that opens the door. That opens the door for everybody to get in. And like whenever people ask me, how do I get in a film? Like, or a parent will say, my son or daughter wants to get into the, what do I do? Well, how do they do it? Now it's very easy. Go on a Kickstarter, look at documentaries, feature films, whatever it is, narrative films that are being shot. And maybe you're a great illustrator. Don't even tell them. Just mock up a poster for them. Send it to them. You like this? Use it for free, and work with me in the future. Give me credit and let me get my own credibility up. And for that, I think that you should, it doesn't matter your gender, the color of your skin. If you're talented, you just have to, make sure to get out there. And once you're in through the independent way, then you can rise up and say, hey, I have this script also. You know what I mean?
I do agree, but up to a point, because obviously when we've excluded so many people, it is also about making sure that a minority group's pushed through. But you are absolutely right that I think talent will always rise to the top. I had a great chat with Victor Williams, a black actor who's been in 180 episodes. But we have to be aware. Jon, do you have anything you'd like to add on your journey and any challenges you've, directly speak to us of how we can help as a white female or a white male?
Yeah, no, I think that I've always approached, I come from the school of make it yourself. I really believe in that to that point. So when I'm not seeing, in the theater scene in, the 2000s when I was in New York and auditioning and stuff, there was some stuff that I was getting, but not too much. And so it's kind of like, for me to play the lead of a fantasy show, nobody's asking for someone like me to play the lead of a fantasy show. So I just made it. And I really believe in that.
Lee's saying.
What's that? I'm sorry?
That's tying in with what Lee's saying.
Yeah. So I
project and
right.
And
I really subscribe to that. And then the other thing I would add is that as a writer, when friend and I are doing musicals in New York, I guess we approach it with such a theatrical mentality, but we have this, we start building out this troupe of people. And then suddenly you start realizing and I'm sure TV shows get like this too after a while, but you start writing to the strengths of those people and what they can play no matter who they are. And you just start writing roles around them rather than writing roles to be filled blankly. And that always creates so much better work rather than something that's blind. At least I found when we do our shows, and we're constantly tinkering and fixing. And it's like that Lost story. When they wrote Lost, they didn't give characters any sort of ethnic definition or what have you, so that they could audition everybody that they felt could fit, and they just picked the best actors. And I think that
with my play, it was written completely uniform, and then I auditioned, and it's been played ever since by Whitney Andrews. Fantastic.
But
it was her talent first and foremost that she's incredible. So,
right.
That's very wise. So I've got one question for myself. Okay, I'm going to get off this Zoom, and Ray, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to add, because I think being a stand-up comedian, I have a different perspective on voice. And you asked specifically about more as a writer and a creator in that realm. In stand-up comedy, so much of it is about voice and perspective and point of view. And so for myself, I feel like if there's a character I'm writing, Undependent is unfortunately predominantly white males, because that we were writing about our own experience, so we're in front of the camera for it, and we have episodes kind of plotted out for the future that specifically involve diversity, and the topic of it, and then the two characters not even wanting to address it, and ultimately
actually,
just listening.
I did want to ask you that, because
Yeah.
with comedy, especially stand-up comedians, you take such a risk to be controversial anyway, that you can really push things in society and make people think. So that is it scary when it comes to things with diversity, or?
Oh yeah, it's because it's such a heavy topic. It's so loaded. It's terrifying that you might phrase something the wrong way. You might an interpretation of it could be incredibly negative. And
with Twitter and social media, it's just the smallest thing can go nuts, and yet it's very you don't shy away, and that's why I was checking with my black friends if I'm unsure. It's like
and I think a lot of it is like, as someone who I hate to say this phrase because it would make me internally roll my eyes, but I consider myself an ally, and I want to further those things. My issue though, as a creator, is I feel like when it comes to writing authentic characters, you can write characters from any background as a writer, but ultimately the comedian in me wants to say, no, that's a voice that's not mine, and I want to hear that voice from the person that it represents. And I think a lot of it comes from that element. And I think now, thankfully, we are seeing more stuff. Two of the most amazing things I've watched most recently are Pen 15 on Hulu, which comes from two women talking about their experience of middle school. And so much of it is like, oh, is that a thing? And my wife will turn to me and say, oh my God, I thought I was the only person that ever experienced that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and it's alien to me,
Okay, I'll check it out.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And then Lovecraft Country on HBO Max. I mean, give it every piece of metal. Give it every piece of metal in the world. They deserve it. And the voice that comes through, it's interesting because the writer of the novel is a white guy, and created a wonderful story. But the showrunner, Misha Green, is a black woman, and it's it's so important.
Collaborations.
Yes, and I think ultimately it does come down to those voices need to be authentic and heard. And if I want to get that real experience, it has to be from the person that experienced it. I think it's about listening, I guess. So I should just shut up then. So that's my ultimate thing, is like, I shouldn't say anything after all of this. That's my thesis statement.
It's great to hear a male say these things as well. I spend so much time on female panels, and you're saying all this great stuff and everyone's agreeing, and then you're like, we're in a room, we all know this. So no, I appreciate that. So just very quick question. I've got one last question, but first, just for myself, if I get off this Zoom and just write, like, say, a 7-page script, which could easily be like a mini episode, what do I do? Like, I'm in lockdown, I've got an iPhone, and can I start a series? And what would I do? Anyone?
You sure can. I would say yes, absolutely, 100%. I think it's I think it's if that's what you have, if you have an iPhone and you write a 7-page script, it's so much easier today than it's ever been. Like, just start. That's always my advice for anything.
Proper equipment, especially obviously Ray and Lee's show, it's part of it's a character in itself, and they forget the equipment and have to go and get it. It's difficult to get that together even for a short series. I don't want to get into budgets with you, but
well, what's the series? I mean, if you're having epic battles, you can't do this in your apartment, or your house with an iPhone.
They're so organic and natural. If you take Dani and Tim's show, how much pre-production time did you have on that, Dani?
Okay. You mean before?
Yeah. So pre-production times and what went into making these shows.
So we this is like no budget filmmaking. We did everything ourselves pretty much. We called on people that we knew and trusted. A lot of the writing was specific to actors that we knew, people we wanted to work with, and we used their apartments. So
if I wrote something like that, that's a sign that everyone that's out there in lockdown you know, within social distancing, there is ways you can still be creating art in the pandemic, which is kind of what I was driving at with lockdown. We're all
absolutely. I mean, I feel like everybody who's in post-production,
yeah,
like that's where it's at right now. This is a particularly great time because we did all of our post in lockdown, and that was incredible to have that time.
And also writing. I mean, it's a perfect time for us.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
there's the hope for anyone listening. So
yeah,
work on your post-production.
We need that kick, actually.
So last question, and then I'm going to see if we've got any Q&A. We've got 10 minutes. So my last question is just, you know, what's your next step? What's the next stage in the journey for your series or for you personally? And bearing in mind COVID times, you know, where do you see we're going here?
My series has been turned into an anthology series by necessity, since most of my actors are spread across the country. So I wrote the second season of Brazzy Jazzy, and it's different characters, different wildness, but it'll be the same sort of 60-minute arc of them in New York, what happens. I'm not going to give the story away. You're going to have to watch it, hopefully in about 6 months. Working on other things, as you were saying, lockdown, I don't want to say, once you get over the COVID depression of, you know, world is ending, I'm never going to be able to eat in a restaurant again, yada, yada, yada. As writers, we are gifted that we can work at home. We can, you know, my day job, I also work at home. So I've had more time, and I've finished a feature and 2 pilots in the last 6 months, because I haven't had this much uninterrupted time of not having to go on the subway, or in Ray's case, you know, roam around Providence like a wild man.
There's any writers out there that just haven't been able to write, that's okay too. It's totally fine. You're doing fine.
That's 100% okay. That is so okay.
Yeah, agreed.
Sorry.
Good for you, Steve.
Steve, you've become that person. I've read 7 movies in lockdown, and everyone else is, oh my God. No, but I think
Buddha, because you know, this is where it all kicks in. All of that training and yoga and all of that has allowed me to focus and cleanse the mechanism, as they say.
We've actually opened questions, and the one that they've sent, we have just addressed. What are you doing creatively during COVID? So you're doing post-production. We are writing as writers, but we are establishing that if you don't feel like writing, that's totally fine too. Is there any more questions, Lauren?
And while those come through, I would like to just add, I'm a parent. I have a 6-year-old, and so I hear about, you know, people having time to write and things like that, and I'm just like, oh man, that sounds so cool. Take me with me. Take me with you. Take me with you. Let me join your circus.
Yeah, I think it's so important in the pandemic to realize that we all have problems. Every single person has been affected by this, but they're all slightly different. So a writer with 4 kids at home is probably, you know, going up the walls. A single person's probably more lonely than they've ever been and can't write, because I don't know. So I think we just have to do what we can, kind of thing, and not panic.
Joanna, I just wanted to jump in really quickly. You had asked before about the this ties into like what we're doing now during the pandemic, and like having to work from home and writing. But I mentioned earlier that I work in animation, and I just wanted to say, you know, I've attended a lot of industry conventions via Skype and Zoom and Google Meets and all of these different platforms, and we're doing a good job with it. But there's an interesting thing that just sort of went around at MIPCOM, which it wasn't just in October, is that Viacom sort of announced, they said, basically in the world of animation, if there's no diversity in your cast, there's no deal. So things are changing. Like there is that in the air, and it takes a long time, and it takes for the audience to recognize that it's something that they want to see. And once that becomes economically viable, then everyone piles on. It's when you are, you know, and I've had this experience where I'm with a producer, and we're working on a thing, and there's cultural differences. And so we work in a global sphere, especially in the pandemic. And a lot of times there's cultural differences where they don't have the same gender ideas that we do here in the United States. And it can be difficult to convince a producer that girls should be doing more than just getting coffee and snacks for the boys. And like the great thing is when a company like Viacom makes an announcement like that, it makes everything so much easier for creators. So that stuff makes such a really big difference.
Yeah, and you know what? It's like it's crazy when you think that equal pay and stuff was sort of 1960s, and you know, still we've got female actors not matching their male counterparts. So you know, these are announcements. You know, that's a great fact, and it's good that it's happening. But just not to take the pressure off. But we are running short of time. Lee, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you know, my advice to anybody right now in pandemic is release what you can. I mean, the day that we went into lockdown here happened to be coincidental. It was the day that we released Waldo on Weed, which is a documentary we did. And I'm releasing a documentary on Tuesday about Nickelodeon called The Orange Years, because everybody's in pandemic. We're not, why wait anymore, you know? And Ray and I had a lot of discussions about releasing Undependent now, because we were talking to a network prior to the lockdown, but then everything stopped, and so all the talk stopped. Yeah. So we're sitting on these episodes, and we just said, everybody's home. Let's just put it out there and see what happens. You know, I mean, if you have something right now that you've been waiting for the right time to release it. We're going back into lockdown. It's second wave. Release it. You're going to have attention. You're going to have eyeballs.
And I think Lee's just answered our last question, which came in, which was advice for new people starting out. And I really think, you know, if you're in the mind space, is just to get your show out there. We've adapted to Zoom and stuff, and it has all its flaws. But at the end of the day, you know, this festival's now going globally. You can join from anywhere in the world. So that it's like just looking at it positive, trying to be as optimistic as possible, because we are going to all come through this. So if anyone wants to jump on and say anything about advice for new people starting out.
I always say, walk the walk, don't talk the talk. Everyone says they're a writer. Write it, put it on paper. Don't say you're going to write it. And I'm a firm believer that talent wills out at the end. If you are a talented writer, talented performer, can scrap something together that doesn't look like two people sitting on a couch talking, people are going to want to see it. And you're trying to capture lightning in a bottle. We can have everything perfect. If we followed the Hollywood formula, it was just the best actors, the best directors, the best producers, their stuff fails much more than it succeeds. Yeah, so why?
And have lots of projects. My advice is always have lots of things on the go, because you just never know when you're in a meeting, sort of pitching one thing, and you have something, you know, and it connects and things can roll. So have lots
Another philosophy that we had going into this is just the idea, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just like keep going. Is like if we waited around till we had the budget to get like a 4K camera and a crew, we would never have even taken our first step. You know, so we went out, we bought a $300 used SLR, and we just kept going. You know, it's just.
I'm going to wrap up on that point, because it's very, you know, that's the ultimate point, that you can be a successful artist right up until the moment that you give up. So it's just about to keep going. And I just want to say that I obviously said we'll all come through this, and you know, that's not actually true, as we know from what's happening in COVID. You understood my essence of that, but just, you know, just wishing everyone love and stay safe in these times. And it's been wonderful speaking to you, and for all the creators out there, just to really keep going and you know, not be afraid, not be put off by rejection, and just endurance is everything as an artist. I think Lauren's going to say goodbye, but I was just going to say thank you. Great panel, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's super fun.
Yeah, that was great. So informative, and thank you, Joanna.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say we treated ourselves to all of your work in the festival last night, and it was really wonderful to see what you guys are doing.
Yeah, really great work.
Running Lines was a lot of fun.
Fantastic
I watched
stuff.
it last night.
Genuinely, yeah.
Thank you, guys. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Have fun. Bye-bye, guys.